Hey everyone, it's Derek Peterson coming to you for the WBA Asia Telecom Summit 2021. Nice to be here with you. I'm going to be talking about how we're going to bridge the gap in the 5G area by focusing on convergence, Wi-Fi and cellular. What would it be without me talking about convergence, right? All right, so first off, a little bit about Boingo. Boingo's been providing connectivity in venues for over 2 decades now, focused primarily in the beginning on Wi-Fi and now every kind of connectivity that we need, which is IoT, Wi-Fi, cellular, and all the future connectivity we're going to need for this touchless societies that we're creating. We've got a world-class wireless connectivity, and we're delivering that connectivity in over a billion to over a billion consumers annually. And we're serving great iconic venues like what you see here in this slide, the World Trade Center in New York. We've got stadiums that we support, military bases, apartment complexes with our multifamily business, and of course the airports that most people know us for. When we're talking about Boingo Wireless and what we've done over the years, it's really been about deploying networks for consumers and finding great ways to be able to deploy those networks by taking advantage of unlicensed spectrum in the beginning with Wi-Fi. And now today we're deploying 5G networks for all of our carrier friends and getting ready to really ramp up that deployment on private 5G networks and private LTE networks with other new spectrums being released. And of course, one of the key things is not just connecting consumers in the next decade, but also connecting all of the different items that we want to connect. So all those IoT devices, and that's a big part of what we're focused on now and for the future as well. Our wireless strategy is to make sure that we leverage all available spectrum inside of a venue or inside of a location, and that means understanding how to combine licensed, unlicensed, and shared spectrum. We're a neutral host provider who's focused in on the challenges of delivering neutrally. So that means we're going to find the right technology, the right spectrum, and the right solution for that venue to meet whatever their use cases are. And finally, it's very important to focus in on the importance that we have as a company of influencing the standards to make sure that we're not just focused on one of the solutions or a single spectrum or a single use case, but really trying to position ourselves to deliver the connectivity for all the different use cases that you might have to be able to provide that connectivity. So what I wanted to do first is I want to kind of take a look back at where we've come from as an industry and as Boingo as well, and then kind of look forward about what's going to happen and try to end up with focusing in on how I can get you to help join the revolution that's happening in connectivity. So looking back first at what happened in 2015, we ended up focusing in on how we're going to get carriers connected. And one of the first things we did is we launched in 2015 31 airports nationwide in the US that had automatic, secure, and simple connectivity, just like cellular, for Wi-Fi. And this was done, as most of us know, and hopefully are getting involved in it, with Passpoint. And that was a great connected capability, and it allowed that seamless connectivity for Sprint, and they were able to really take advantage of Wi-Fi as part of their footprint. As we moved forward and developed that carrier-grade Wi-Fi, we ended up focusing in on not just that seamless and secure connectivity that Passpoint created, but also recognizing that we wanted to have a consistent user experience. We wanted to focus in on how the security is doing that and that network discovery, but also making sure that we're delivering a good service. And so a lot of work was developed around how to make sure we can measure Wi-Fi service and develop the same kind of quality of service that we have with QCI values in the cellular world. So a lot of work was done in that and continues to be done in the carrier grade Wi-Fi area. Also, we need to make sure that we have a fully integrated end-to-end network. So our network architecture has to take into account the cellular connection that is going to require mobility from AP to AP. And so a lot of new standards came out with 802.11k and V and R that ended up improving the way we automatically maintain that connection and really creating that end-to-end service provisioning as you're walking through a venue from one AP to another, just like you get on cellular, but even a little bit more tougher because you're connecting to so many different small cells as you're walking around instead of a single large tower. And so a lot of work was made and a lot of standards to be able to solve that. And then finally, noticing in on how to think about network engagement and how you're going to manage that network. And so how are you going to know what that individual is doing so that you can improve that? One of the examples I always like to give that we've developed with our carrier grade Wi-Fi is at an airport when you have 400 people come off a plane and you have some few individuals sitting at that airport gate watching Netflix. What you don't want is as those 400 people come off the airplane and their service automatically connects to the Wi-Fi, that they end up having problems being able to watch that Netflix. And so you need to be able to steer and control that back end a little bit so that you can end up making sure that everybody's getting a great experience. And we do that with a little bit of shaping, a little bit of management to make sure that those background possible connections that you don't really care about are not interfering with our front end connections of getting our email or that person who's been sitting there watching that movie. So that was a big part of network engagement, is understanding that network security and adding manageability to that network. And then, of course, it's also about authentication and access control. You need to be able to have a simple way to be able to understand who people are and get them on in a secure way with encryption. And that's a big part of what EAP does, is it encrypts the channel so that as you're transmitting packets back and forth, unlike in an open connection, which is a lot of our commercial connections that they were in the past open with Passpoint, and we've now introduced EAP, and we have this encryption as you're passing data back and forth. A very important part of Passpoint and a very important part of our future and being able to create a great connectivity with Wi-Fi. So that's the past and what we solved in the past. The next thing we need to do is we need to say, okay, so we've solved this simple, secure, managed connectivity through Passpoint. What do we need for the 5G era? We ended up focusing in the previous years on carrier connection and mobile connections, commercial connections by individuals. 5G is introducing a new kind of connections that we need to be able to establish. So let's go ahead and look about how we're going to do that and evolve for the 5G era. So first of all, if we look at today in the 2020s, we have over 150,000 Passpoint locations that people and carriers are automatically connecting to. Boingo has 3+ carrier and cable provider relationships. That's what I can say today, but they continue to evolve, and those automatic connections are happening for most carriers, at least in the United States. We still got a little push we got to do in Asia. So that's why one of the reasons I'm here. And then we also, of course, need to have adoption across many different devices and platforms. And so most of the phones today that you have are Passpoint capable. It's just a matter of the carriers enabling it, and they're able to get on. And we've been able to help a lot of different carriers be able to do this, and a lot of different platforms are now able to be Passpoint enabled real quickly. So if we then look at what's happening then with Wi-Fi and convergence with 5G is the ability to be able to connect seamlessly and secure on a mobile phone is there. But we also want to be able to do is have that same connected capability for all of the other connected devices that are coming down and being a part of our everyday lives. And when we look at 5G and Wi-Fi, one of the things that's happening is we're recognizing that there's strengths that each of them have. When we look at Wi-Fi, it's fast. Can deliver heavy content. Its network efficiency can be challenging a little bit compared to 5G, but you get that enhanced megabits and transfer and that improved latency because you're using small cells. A lot of the other things are a lot the same. Mobility is another key thing, a lot of improvements in mobility. But what we're seeing with this slide is we're seeing that convergence is happening. All of these technologies are there. And what we're doing is we're recognizing that the user experience and the data rates that you need for those experiences is probably the most important factor that we need to evaluate as we start looking towards future connectivity. And so what that brings us to is this idea of open roaming. So now that we've got mobile phones connecting and we've got them connecting simply through Passpoint, we now want to connect all these locations and these premium hotspots and these unpremium hotspots and outside of the norm. We want to connect to these real retail locations. We want to connect free to some of these other locations where there's a Wi-Fi there and be able to support not only our phones, but also other devices that are connecting. And so what we're doing with open roaming is we're reaching out and we're saying we need to find a more simple way to connect. And some of the other speakers are going to talk about how open roaming works. Mark Grayson's going to talk, a couple other individuals on what we're doing to make that connectivity better. But what's important about understanding about that connectivity is we want new roaming opportunities for not only paid networks, these carrier grade networks that I was sharing earlier, where we've added all this control, but also for some of these perhaps non-carrier grade networks, these open and free networks. We also want to secure them and have an easy way to be able to seamlessly and securely connect to them. So in comes open roaming. It's built upon Passpoint. It allows open and free networks without having to create a relationship with the network for every different carrier. So we're not listing it as a relationship that, hey, this is now a Sprint network, and so we're listing their, and I'm using Sprint and they're gone now, but they're now part of T-Mobile. But instead of listing their PLMN ID or their network ID on your network, you're able now to list a roaming consortium ID, and that roaming consortium ID then links back through DNS and other capabilities to establish whether or not you're able to connect without having to turn every network into the appropriate carrier network by broadcasting their network ID. The beauty of that is it allows us to really widen the door for extra connectivity and greater connectivity across all kinds of wireless Wi-Fi connections. The key thing here is it's also using Passpoint so secure. So one day we're going to be able to eliminate, by taking advantage of open roaming, all of these open networks where you're transmitting data back and forth between the device that's connecting and the access point that it's connecting to in the clear. It's going to be secured. And that's a very important part of what open roaming is doing as well. One of the key things that we're building into open roaming is recognizing that we still want carrier grade networks, because carrier grade Wi-Fi is important for that individual who's on that phone call and needs to walk from one end of the airport to the other end of the airport. They're going to need to know that the network is built in a way that when dynamic changes happen inside the network, that they maintain that connectivity because there's quality of service and QCI values that are being applied to that network. But not all networks need that. And so what we've done is we've established this idea of 3 different tiers of networks. The tier 1 network is that open and free network. It has maybe not the best availability due to challenges in the network. Dynamic things happen. Somebody's playing a big video game or downloading some large content. You might end up seeing some speed slowdowns or some latency issues. There might not be enough APs to cover the whole venue, so you might not have that mobility handoff, for example. And then, of course, because it's an open free network, perhaps at a coffee shop or some retail location, you might not have all the reporting that you want to know how your people are connecting and what their quality of service was. In a tier 2 environment, we're going to have availability improvements, speed improvements, low latency improvements. We're going to have some enhanced reporting so you know what you're doing, but you're not going to end up having perhaps the density of that mobility AP handoff to handoff. And then finally, the tier 3 is that carrier grade network that we talked about at the beginning that we established with PassPoint, and we have all this reporting and this handoff, and we're using K, V, and R and all these other tips and tricks to really develop a carrier grade network. And in that case, those tier 3 networks, we're going to continue to see most of the tier 1s and the tier 2s move into those tier 3s over time as the industry understands the value of that, and as we understand how to be able to support that from a financial perspective. So that's really what's key to my discussion today is open roaming, how it's going to enable that. But it wouldn't be appropriate for me to finish without talking about what's going on in the ecosystem. Openness is here. We're seeing Open RAN. We're seeing Open Wi-Fi. We're seeing all of these new capabilities. We saw it happen in other parts of the industry as we moved to operating systems that were open that used to be closed, and when we were developing systems that were open, it's now happening on our network systems as well. Of course, to be able to create that openness and that flexibility that comes with openness, you also need to end up having better standards. And then we need to focus in on virtualization and how virtualization and that openness ends up allowing us to create more flexible networks and an expansion and create seamless upgrades, even though we're upgrading all of these different open networks. So hopefully with virtualized RANs and containers and microservices and all these new technologies that are coming out, the importance is even more on us working together within the WBA to defining standards and defining different rules so that we can end up allowing multiple different types of software to connect faster and easier and deal with all the different permutations that we have to deal with. So virtualization is a key component of 5G era. And I would argue that, that's kind of an old way of talking about it, but it's a very important part of the future is really focusing in on how we build control and reliability into a myriad of different connections that we're going to have. So I'm going to wrap it up here with just saying, hey, it's great to be here as part of the summit and share my thoughts on this. Open roaming is here. Our goal is to build this one global Wi-Fi network that everybody can connect to with those different caveats of free and paid perhaps and different levels of quality. And we're defining those quality initiatives and those standards right now as part of the WBA. We want to make sure that Wi-Fi continues to grow and have an important part in the future of connectivity for ourselves, for our businesses, and for all the things that we want to connect. So please join the WBA, join that Open Roaming Federation, and let's go make Wi-Fi work the way it should work for all of us for the future. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and thanks for having me and letting me be a part of your day today.